Hello everyone and welcome back to Jake's Space. Samsung Unpacked has come and gone and we have 3 new Samsung flagships to talk about. As expected, we got the S23, S23 Plus, and S23 Ultra. Now obviously I don't have any of them yet, they don't come out until the 17th of this month, but I think it'd be good to give a nice overview of each device so that if you're interested in pre-ordering them or upgrading to them in general, you have all the information that you need for that. I'm hoping to get my hands on at least one of them for a more in-depth review in the future, but for now, let's go ahead and just go over the first impressions and the overview of each device. Starting with the vanilla devices in the S23 lineup, that will be the S23 and the S23 Plus, there aren't a whole lot of differences between them and their predecessors. The main difference is going to be the design change, so they have taken away the metal housing for the cameras on the rear of the phone. That has been just kind of deleted, so it's just the 3 lenses just kind of naked on the back of the phone. At first I wasn't so sure about this change, but I've kind of grown to like it. I think it's a good choice. It's very sleek and understated. The other main difference is going to be that the Plus model starts at 256 gigabytes of storage, as opposed to the 128 on the S23 and on last year's S22 Plus. I think this is a welcome change. The only difference between the S22 and S22 Plus was the screen size and the battery size, and it was a $200 price difference. So I think giving it a little bit better specs makes sense to justify that $200 price difference, although I still don't really think it's enough, and I'm sure that people who like a smaller phone wish that they could get that 256 gigabyte base storage. Just like last year, the main difference between the two phones is going to be the screen size and the battery size. So screen size for the S23 is going to be 6.1 inches, while the S23 Plus is 6.6. And battery size, the S23 has a 3900 mAh battery, while the S23 Plus has a 4700 mAh battery. Each one has a 200 mAh increase from last year. Both the screens are 120 Hz dynamic AMOLED. These are 1080 flat displays. I think that these are probably more than enough for most people. I personally don't think I can tell the difference between 1080p and 1440p, and I use a 1440p phone every day, and I honestly cannot tell the difference. When it comes to refresh rate, if you're used to a 120 Hz screen, you would definitely notice if it went down to 60. I typically can't tell the difference between 90 and 120, but 60 and 120 is a very noticeable difference. So if you've got, I believe an S20 and up, those all have 120 Hz refresh rates. Both phones use the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Samsung, which is basically just an overclocked version of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 that's in most phones that have come out this year, like the OnePlus 11. The cameras on this year's S23 and S23 Plus are refreshed versions of the last cameras that they had. So there's still a 15 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 10 megapixel 3x optical zoom camera. But they've refreshed the sensors to make them even better than they were before, and they were already some of the best cameras in the business. So definitely cameras are a strong suit of this phone. Prices stayed the same as last year, with the S23 starting at $799 and the S23 Plus starting at $999. As for my thoughts on these devices, I think that they're a fine improvement from last year, kind of a refinement of last year's S22s. Like I said, nothing groundbreaking here, but just a nice upgrade from last year's phones. Now on to the big dog, the S23 Ultra. The Ultra got the most improvements this year, both in the camera department and in the design department. So camera, they added a 200 megapixel main camera to the S23 Ultra, up from 108 megapixels last year. Now I'm not a camera expert, and I know that megapixels don't always equal a great camera, but I do know that having a sensor that size is going to give you some astounding detail, and is going to give more information whenever the camera bends down to a 12 megapixel image, which is what the final image is going to be, unless you use the 200 megapixel mode. I did get a few minutes of hands-on time with my store's S23 demo. The 200 megapixel mode definitely has some incredible detail, and I noticed I was using the space zoom that zooms up to 100 times, and they seem to have really done something different and much better with the processing. So I was taking a picture at 100 times, and the image in the viewfinder was still pretty grainy, but then once I snapped the picture and went and looked at it in the gallery, it was a lot clearer. Even then, I've seen with like the S22 Ultra's 100 times zoom. So that's actually really impressive that they're able to use some software to really sharpen that up. Surrounding the 200 megapixel main camera are going to be a 12 megapixel ultra wide, a 10 megapixel 3 times optical zoom, and a 10 megapixel 10 times optical zoom periscope camera. So that's what gives you that 100 times space zoom that I was talking about earlier, is that periscope camera. Additionally, they changed the design of the 23 Ultra a little bit compared to the S22 Ultra. They've squared off the sides to make it a little easier to hold, a little more reminiscent of old Note designs, and I actually think that it makes a huge difference. So instead of on the S22 Ultra, the back and the front glass kind of came to a point like this, and it was a very narrow thing, very hard to hold on to without a case on it. Whereas now there's a nice flat edge, flat aluminum rail that you can hold on to. I think it really makes a big difference when it comes to just holding the phone. Especially with how large the device is, it was really pretty difficult to hold the S22 Ultra without a case. Like the S23 Plus, the base storage is 256 gigabytes, although it goes all the way up to 1 terabyte if you buy an unlocked version through Samsung. For the 512 and the 1 terabyte options, that is going to give you 12 gigabytes of RAM, whereas the base 256 gigabyte spec is going to give you 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is the same as the regular S23 phones. The S23 Ultra features a 6.8-inch 1440p 120Hz dynamic AMOLED screen. It is curved just like the S22 Ultra. It is less curved, at least from what I remember with the S22 Ultra. It feels a lot better on the sides, and I really like curved phones. I know a lot of people don't like the way that they feel, but I just love the swipe navigation using a curved phone. Using my Pixel 7 Pro, I just feel like it's the greatest, and I think they look better. So that's my hot take on this video. Curved screens are cool, and I don't want them to go away. So I'm really hoping to get my hands on an S23 Ultra in some capacity so that I can do a full review in depth. So if you are interested in that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I think I'm going to be able to make that happen. So specs are interesting, but the real question you're probably asking is, should I buy this? And for most people, I would say yes, but there are some caveats. First of all, if you have an S20 or Note 20 and older, I would say go ahead and upgrade. I think if you're an S series user, the S23 and S23 Plus are going to be big upgrades from the S20 series or anything before that. And for Note 20 users and before, I think that the S23 Ultra is going to be a much better Note than what you've got right now. Now for S21 users, if you have a regular S21, I would say go ahead and upgrade to an S23. I think that's going to be a worthwhile upgrade just in terms of camera and battery life for sure, because I know the S21's had some battery life issues. S21 Plus, I would personally wait. So you're definitely going to have software updates until the S24 comes out. So I would say just wait for the S24 and see if they do anything exciting with that one, because there's not really anything exciting even compared to the S21 Plus, much less the S22 Plus. S21 Ultra users, if you want the S Pen, I would say go ahead and upgrade. Other than that, I still think the S21 Ultra is one of the best phones you can have right now, so I wouldn't upgrade at this point unless you really want the S Pen, and maybe you want to try out that 200 megapixel camera. But without those things, I think that the S21 Ultra is probably more than enough for you at this point, and I would wait and see if they do anything interesting with the S24 Ultra. S22 series users, I wouldn't upgrade. I don't think it's enough to change. The only thing I could maybe think of is if you're an S22 Ultra user and you just want the flat sides. But the trade-in values for S22 Ultras on Samsung's website is not very good. So that one's kind of up to you. And of course, it doesn't really matter what I say, it's what you value. So if you want to go ahead and upgrade to the S23s from an S22, I would probably do that. I love getting new phones, so don't let me stop you. But if you're looking for advice, I would say sit it out if you're an S22 user. But of course, these are all my opinions, and I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. I really appreciate the support as always. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you are too. And I will see you next time.